as women, we have the unique challenge of having to kind of face a culture that is in reality very against the essence of womanhood and femininity, while also still trying to retain that femininity and naturalness that comes with living within your hormones, whether that's exercising within your hormones or just the way that you're approaching life. And I think that this is something that is starting to be talked about more, but from a very secular standpoint of delving within your femininity or, finding yourself. But I think from a Christian standpoint, this hasn't necessarily been addressed quite a ton. And so I wanted to kind of hop on here and talk about truly becoming the feminine version of yourself and understanding what's natural and what makes sense, while also understanding the world that we live in and why we might feel differently about some things. In the world we live in right now currently, being feminine or, desiring to be a nurturing soul and stay at home with your children and nurture them and train them up is not super valued. And I think that we all kind of have this understanding that it isn't valued. People in the grocery store, I mean, if you go in the grocery store with a couple of kids, they kind of look at you weird, like, what are you doing? Why are you here? Especially in the middle of the day, which is really weird. But because of that cultural standpoint, I think especially within school systems and especially within media, it is very much portrayed that success is supposed to look and feel a certain way to a woman that for many women is against really their nature. However, because they've been fed an ideology for so long that modern feminism has been feeding women, really basically, is this understanding that women are created in a very similar way to men, that there's not a ton of differences between women and men. And so really all you have to do is step up and be productive, and productivity looks like getting a job, and productivity looks like getting a 9 to 5 and working during those hours and being most productive, quote unquote, during that time period. And yet for most women, in fact, for all women, but especially for the majority of women who have much higher levels of estrogen and progesterone and those lower levels of testosterone, this can kind of vary from woman to woman. But for the majority of them, their natural cycle is very different than a 9 to 5 productive schedule. Whereas in men with high testosterone, a 9 to 5 schedule is actually perfect for their productivity and the way in which they can be productive. Their mind is best, their physical strength is best during those times. And so they're generally very, quote unquote, productive at their work day when it's like those very specified hours, very stringent, same from day to day. Whereas for women, because we have more of that monthly cycle and stages in our life where there's pregnancy or having a young baby or having young children, there's stages in our lives where there's a lot more flex and flow than what men have. And so I think because we live in this society where feminism has propagated this idea that we are the same as men, that we can do everything that a man can, that we are capable of it, and not only that we are capable of it, but that we should embrace that and run towards stress rather than living within the way that we were created and being perhaps a little bit more creative, perhaps being a little bit more bent to having a more flexible schedule, or being business owners, or being in this area that's a lot more flexible than what a man is, I talk about all things living intentionally, rooted in God's word. And so if that is something you're interested in, I talk about topics like these, mindsets that we can have to live an intentional life related to pregnancy and motherhood, of course, wifehood, your faith, finances. And if those are items that you're interested in learning about, go ahead and click subscribe. But because the society has kind of propagated this, a lot of women are going into the workforce feeling that this is the best option for them, that this is what it takes to succeed, that becoming this corporate boss girly is what success looks like. That's what you should aspire to be, that your big dreams and goals should align with this method of productivity that is very centered and focused on men. And eventually, many of these women are reaching times and points in their life where they're realizing that this isn't sustainable anymore for them. That all of a sudden, when they're pregnant and throwing up every single day, they're like, how come I can't do the same level of work that a man can do? And how come I have to try so much harder? And during certain times of their cycle, they feel so much more worn down, so much less productive. And a lot of women are wondering, like, how come I feel so much more weight of the stress of this job than my male counterparts do in the same exact job? I think a lot of this can really be rooted down to the hormones, and something that I've been learning recently about the differences in our hormones and the way that we approach things is that actually women respond to stress so much differently than men do. And so men with their higher testosterone, when stress comes, like when an army is invading, that testosterone kicks into gear and allows them to actually be more productive. They go into attack mode. And so it's kind of like they're, able to get more done, feel more productive when there's a pressure of stress. Like, for instance, if they have a pressure of, I need to provide for this family, or a pressure at work, maybe of, here's a specific deadline or whatever, the stress from that actually encourages their bodies to work harder towards that goal. And this is not to say that not all women can be goal-oriented, because I think a lot of women truly can. But this does mean that men in general are much more likely to excel in goal orientation and in responding to stress in a way that women don't. Because when women approach stress, which with much lower levels of testosterone, much higher levels of estrogen and progesterone, our bodies actually go into more of a flight protective zone rather than an attack zone. And so for women who feel like they have a high stressful job, it can be very hard for those same women to balance other parts of their life that their men counterparts are doing maybe a bit better than them. Like, maybe their male counterparts are balancing family life and also balancing work life, and mentally the men are, they're checking out of work and their mind is going to their family, and they are able to still be present and in the moment. Whereas what we're noticing with a lot of females is when they check out of work, their mental brain is still so focused on work and the stress that work brings that it bleeds into how they approach their family life. And so they have a lot harder time mentally dealing with the effects that stress has than men do. And I think that this is so interesting because a lot of times, perhaps maybe there's some activists who would say, there's these differences and that's why we need to make the workforce more women friendly, which perhaps that is an alternative. But I do think that there is a big consideration for creating, as women, deciding to create a way in which we are able to best work within our natural cycle, best work within our natural estrogen, and without as much stress as men do. God made men to be able to carry stress just a lot better mentally and emotionally, even just physically. And so because of that, it doesn't affect their fertility as much. It still does, certainly, but not as much as it would for a woman in that case. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of these women who they're in high stress careers, very high stress. And they're choosing these careers because they want to quote unquote excel, be the boss babe, whatever their goal is. They're choosing and being pushed to pursue high stress careers like STEM, doctors, etc. And then once they're in it, they feel like they can't disconnect. And then they wonder, why do I have problems with my fertility? Or why do I have problems with connecting with other people outside of my work and like doing other things outside of my work, maybe less than my male counterparts do? And so they then continue to blame men for that problem, saying that because we live in a male-dominated society, it's the men's fault that I feel like this. They're making me feel invalidated, when in reality, it's actually your own hormones reacting to the stress that you're under and just reacting differently than a man would in that situation. I think that this is a very interesting conversation and something that I've definitely been learning and leaning into. And I think as women, we can really try to lean more into our feminine sides and try to choose careers that are much lower stress than what maybe some stereotypical careers that women are being pushed to right now. So for instance, I currently work virtually and it is a very flexible job. And it allows me to have a lot of flexibility, but also there aren't super hard, for most of the time, there are sometimes, but for the most part, there aren't super tough, stringent deadlines that I'm having to meet in my job. Now, obviously, at some points there are, but because my job is set up the way it is, like jobs like teachers or even nurses sometimes, but jobs like this, writing, they're set up to be a little bit more flexible and a little bit more lower stress, so that way women can actually feel like they can still excel in their home life and in their work life and in all aspects of their life, relationally and socially and emotionally and mentally, while still being able to, for a period of time, work outside of the home. I hope that this helped you kind of understand a little bit more about women and their relationship with the workforce today, and especially with the decision that so many women feel conflicted between whether to be a stay-at-home mom or to be a working mom. And I hope that this brings a greater insight. And if you liked this video, don't forget to go ahead and give it a like so that way it can push out to the algorithm just a bit more, and that'll really help me out. So thank you guys so much for doing that.